All right, so starting the webinar now, folks in. Welcome to Powerhouse Arena's virtual events. My name is Chris, I'm the events coordinator, and tonight we are very happy to be hosting Gigi Georges and Susan Conley to celebrate their Maine-themed new books, Downeast and Landslide. I'll share a link to buy copies in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can use the chat or Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and they'll take your questions at the end of the event. I'll introduce them now. Gigi Georges is a former White House special assistant to Bill Clinton and communications director for the Department of Education under Mayor Michael Bloomberg here in New York. She has also served as program director for Harvard Kennedy School's Innovation Strategies Initiative. Her articles have appeared in the New York Times, MIT's Innovations Journal, and Harvard's Government Innovators blog. She is a longstanding advisory board member of Harvard's Nieman Foundation for Journalism, and she lives in New Hampshire and Downeast, Maine. Susan Conley is the author of 5 critically acclaimed books, including her recent novel, Landslide. Her previous novel, Elsie Come Home, was a most anticipated or best book at Oprah Magazine, Marie Claire, Southern Living, Photos, and others. Her writing has appeared in New York Times Magazine, the Paris Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, the Harvard Review, and more. She's on the faculty of the Stone Coast MFA program and is co-founder of The Telling Room, a youth writing center in Portland, Maine. And I'll hand it over now.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
There was a little moment there. Hi, Gigi. Nice.
Hi, Susan. Great to see you. Great to be here tonight.
Yeah, well, we're talking about this new, really, really resonant, beautiful book, Downeast, 5 Maine Girls and the Unseen Story of Rural America. When this came in my mailbox, I just devoured it because I felt like it was speaking my Maine language. So I just want to sort of give the floor over to you, Gigi, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about what the book means to you and why you wrote the book.
Thank you, Susan. And that is really high praise coming from a Mainer, a true Mainer like you. And I have to add that if anyone hasn't read Susan's latest in a hit parade of great books, Landslide, equally, I just raced through this, and it's an amazing book. And I hope we have a chance to talk a little bit about Landslide as well, and the ways in which the themes of both books really intersect. But it is really good to be here tonight, and it's great to be, even though we're virtual, it's great to be back in Brooklyn, my hometown. So a big shout out to Brooklyn as well. So Downeast is essentially a narrative nonfiction book that I started about 5 years ago, reported on the ground in Maine for 4 years. And what it is essentially a chronicling of life in small town America, as seen through the eyes of 5 young women who are coming of age and who are realizing both what the hardships of this area are, but also the opportunities and their connection to this area is. And in many ways, it is a revelatory narrative because it cuts against that dominant downbeat narrative that we hear so much of, especially in recent years, around what rural America is about, around the hopelessness and despair. And it gets into the hearts and minds of these young women whose hometowns face significant challenges. And Susan, you know very well what the challenges are in rural Maine, as they are in so many small towns, but it strikes a hopeful note through the journeys that they take and through their explorations.
So well said. Yeah. You know, I have thought myself about writing nonfiction books about the demise of fishing villages in Maine, and I could never find the word hopeful. So it's so great that you are able to sort of find that hope. And I think you do it through these really powerful stories of, you know, fortitude and resilience of these young women. So I wondered if you could take us to that idea of gender and to the winnowing process that probably occurred for you to end up focusing on these 5 women?
Yeah, so in the big picture on this, one of the things I came to realize very quickly, and then I'll sort of walk back and take you a little bit through how I got there. But one of the big things that I took away in this was the way in which, in all of the accounts of rural America, and there have been quite a few, especially again in the past 5 to 10 years, there's been an explosion, but particularly in the past 5 years, that the voices of contemporary young women have been almost absent. And it really struck me that there was an opportunity here to allow those voices to be heard. How I came to this, as I said, I'm an urban kid. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I come from this big, sort of very loud and loving Greek immigrant family, and sort of found my way after working in urban places, after focusing on urban policy issues for so many years. My husband and I, about 15 years ago, ended up moving northward and going to more rural places and starting to raise our daughter there. I realized as I looked around that what I saw wasn't very in tune with what I was hearing and what I was reading. And I just wanted to dig deeper, and I wanted to learn more. And I took a ride based on the advice of a good friend of ours in Acadia, in Mount Desert Island, Maine, which is an area, right, that draws, as I write, busloads and billionaires, that draws summer tourists that people think of when they think of as Maine. And I took a ride on his advice about an hour north of the area. And that area in Acadia is a place where we have a home in Southwest Harbor. And what I found was just something that I think people would find really surprising. I found this place where I spent time with the young people. I had an opportunity to go to the high school. I sat with the kids. The principal and superintendent were amazing. They let me do these informal focus groups and come in and just sort of hang out with the kids. And they were extraordinary. I mean, particularly the young women, they were just excelling. And they were doing so well, and they were really hopeful and optimistic, even though they had their eyes wide open around the real difficulties and struggles that were going on around them. But most of all, they were very connected to the place they came from and to the community. And I found in these 5 young women so much to explore, and because they gave me the opportunity to spend these 4 years with them, I was able to follow them in their ups and downs, and their tensions and their tragedies, and in their hopeful moments.
Wow. Wow. Well, I mean, it reads like you're embedded and that they gained an enormous amount of trust with you. I'm sensing that this might be a nice time, actually, Gigi, for you to read a few pages so we can get the tone and the flavor, and then we can keep talking maybe about how you actually went about gathering the stories.
That sounds great. And I'd love to, after the read, even talk a little bit about some of these individual girls, because I think their stories are amazing. But I'm just going to read a couple of pages. I'll set the scene first. It's 2016 in this particular scene, and it comes very early in the book. And they're in Downeast, Maine, which is, as I said, a very rural, very isolated, and very challenged place. The towns that these girls come from are really small. There are a few hundred people, and the local high school girls basketball team, which is led by this extraordinary coach, female coach, who is also a kick-ass lobster fisherman, has made it against the odds to the finals of the state championship. And they've got 4,000 local fans cheering them on as they enter into the final moments of the game. With 7 seconds left in the game, the Lady Knights still led by 2 possessions. The gold ball was in their grasp, and the girls were dancing a bit as Olivia called their last timeout. No fouls, she exhorted, fighting to check her own exhilaration. Just let them shoot. But they were smiling, and Olivia was smiling, and she said, "Man, I'm proud of you," and sent them on their way. When the game ended, the roars were deafening, and the night-long celebration began. Every one of Harrington's 950 residents felt as if they had carried home the coveted gold ball. Along with neighbors from the adjoining towns of Addison, Cherryfield, Columbia, and Millbridge, they had made the 5-hour round-trip drive to Augusta Civic Center. They had followed their hometown girls since the season's late November start, from the gym at Narragansett High, where most of them had gone to school years earlier, to Searsport, Baileyville, Jonesport, and other hamlets along the Downeast corridor. As the season chugged along and the girls ground their way to an 18-2 season, the people here found themselves forgetting, for a couple of hours each week, about where they'd find the money for the unpaid heating bill, or how many times they'd fix that leaking roof on their aging double wide, about the way the money wasn't coming in so fast once blueberry raking season had come and gone, or why this year's lobster yield wasn't even close to what they needed, ever since Donnie had succumbed to the lure of fentanyl. About where they'd go without their neighbors knowing to stock up on food for the long winter that lay ahead. They found themselves forgetting, and they cheered for the squad with an average height of 5'5". They cheered for their multi-talented coach, Olivia Marshall, who gave the girls something to strive for on and off the court. And they cheered for the possibility that this once robust set of communities could beat the odds in other ways. Because if a group of underdog girls could lift themselves up from the valley of the overlooked, surely they could too.
What a great passage to read. I feel like it's an emblem of the whole book, really. So resonant, so powerful. I'm struck by the sort of sleight of hand. You're really good at that macro view there, right? We have this large frame, and then you go in for these close-ups, right? So we're in the game, and then the game is almost a metaphor for all of the girls' lives. Will they win? And do you want to take us now, actually, Gigi, to an even closer up moment with one of the girls or a couple that, I don't know, maybe moments where you knew you had something on your hands, so you knew you were onto something here with this book?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll talk about just a couple of them. I mean, they're all so extraordinary, and each in her own way. But there is sort of maybe 2 extremes that come together. And one is there's a tough story in the book about a young woman named Willow. And we use pseudonyms in the book to protect their privacy, although since then, as you'll see later, I'll show a couple of slides, some of the girls have agreed to come forward and reveal their identities. But this young woman, Willow, grew up in a really tough household. Her dad is a substance abuser, got hooked on opioids and later turned to heroin, and continues to struggle. And there was physical abuse in the household, and she moved 7 times before she was 8. One of her grandmothers ended up going to prison for embezzlement, and she had been living with that grandmother and those grandparents for some time. And she really represents this part of the youth in rural America that faces some really tough things. But she also represents something else, because Willow is an example of someone when you think of rural America, and when we often talk about rural America, we talk about this idea of that 1 in a million who has to escape, those kids who have to get out. Willow would have every reason to want to escape. And even at one point in the book, she has this boyfriend who she's actually never met while she's engaged to someone else. And they have this relationship online, and he says, and he lives in Michigan, and they've known each other for a long time. And he says, you know, come to Michigan, come, we'll start a new life. You can get out of there and we'll build it together. And she thinks about it. But what she says in the end when she decides to stay is, I love Downeast. It is a part of me. And she talks about the way in which she could never leave it, that the community has supported her, that she is totally bonded to the land and sea and the bounty of nature around her, and that she foresees that she can make her way out. That she is not going to be that victim, and that she is not going to find the easy escape. And she perseveres and represents this tremendous resilience that I found in all of the 5 girls and in so many in the community around them. So she is, you know, in this path, right? This one path. And then you have the path of Josie, on the other hand, who comes from this family that is not multi-generational. Her grandparents moved as homesteaders from Pennsylvania and started a dairy farm and really stuck with it. And so she is still perceived as from away, even though her grandparents and her parents have now been there, and she's born and raised with her sisters. And Josie ends up, she's very artistic and she's very sensitive. She's very, very bright. And she comes from a religiously conservative family, and a very tight-knit family. She ends up being the second from the high school ever to go to Yale. And she's the valedictorian. And of course, the first ever to go to Yale is her older sister, right? So there they are, Josie and her sister, blazing these trails. And she is discovering that she's got one foot in Downeast, Maine, and another foot in New Haven. And the soul searching that comes out of that is really quite something. And one of the things that struck me with both Willow and Josie and the other young women is just how self-aware and self-possessed they are about what they're going through. That I imagine, you know, I know when I was 18 or 19, I certainly didn't have. And that is just really something that I found, you know, truly, truly wonderful to experience with them. It was such a gift.
Yeah, God, I bet. I mean, so it's funny because we talked about this yesterday, how this novel of mine, Landslide, is all about boys and sort of the boy vulnerability that we don't often see, and also the kind of work in progress that the teen boy can be in my novel, right? Not to fall victim to these sort of reductive stereotypes, but I think you said it really well, that together our 2 books would make one composite of a Maine town. And the boys in Landslide are just not that pulled together yet. They're not, you know, particularly the younger one. And I was really struck by that as well in your book, how, and I'm thinking about what that's born out of, you know, that's born out of a need, I think, to be resilient, right? I mean, there are huge financial pressures, it seems like, really on everyone, all of them in different ways, right? Class is just a huge pressure on these girls, but yet they don't seem all that daunted by it.
Right. I think that's right. And it is really interesting to see the way in which they just incorporate these sort of facts of life, right, around around how they've grown up, around having this work ethic that is not, it's not something they trumpet. You know, we have this great work ethic, they just do it, right? So McKenna, who is just a spitfire, and learns as a very young girl how to lobster fish and falls in love with it. She learns at her father's knee. She starts fishing at age 8. She has been working her entire life out hauling lobsters, first with her father and her brothers, and then on her own. By the time she's 17, she's captaining her own lobster boat. And she just, you know, you talk to her and it's just very, I mean, this is true also quintessentially Maine, as you, Susan, know so well, right? She's just very matter of fact about it. And it just is. It is a part of who she is. It is a part of the culture. And it is a part also of the way in which the community supports each other, right? So, you know, if a lobster fisherman gets hurt and can't haul for a period of time, the members of the community around them, the other lobster fishermen, will just pick up his work and they'll haul double that day, and they'll do rotations, and they'll, you know, there really is a culture of both taking those challenges head on, not complaining about them, not making a big deal of them, and just adding it on. And it is an interesting and fun thing to see. And then to see these fishermen also, these big burly guys, right, get off their boats and run home and shower in basketball season and get over to the gym, not to cheer their boys on, although they will cheer them on, but to cheer their girls on. I just found that so fun to see in a way, because there is this stereotype around men and boys, right? Although I have to say, Susan, I want to turn it back to you. And if you could, you know, Landslide, as you said, really does focus on these young men and the men. Although I would say, as seen through the eyes of a very strong woman. And I wonder if you would just take a couple of minutes for those who haven't read Landslide to sort of fill in the blanks a little bit around that.
Well, sure. I mean, it's really why we're in conversation together, I think, is because we've written these books that spotlight these Maine towns. I'm fourth generation mid-coast Maine, and I had long wanted to write the story of a fishing village under pressure and a fishing family under pressure. And I also have teenage boys, and I say that I speak boy. So I really wanted to see if I could capture all the vulnerability and all the like hidden emotion of teenage boyhood that I think gets missed a lot in our culture, a whole lot. So that's how Landslide was born. It was born of, you know, listening to the Fleetwood Mac song and then really trying to be in dialogue really with teenage boys. And in some ways, it feels like scenes from Landslide could be in Downeast, your book. I mean, it's really quite amazing that way. So I'm having a thought, which is maybe this is a time to show the slides that you have, because I really want to hear, I think people would be interested to hear, how does a journalist like you embed, get trust? We want to hear, were you shadowing? Were you actually like in living rooms a lot? But maybe if you showed us photos first, we'd kind of know where you were at least.
That sounds great. I'm gonna share some slides right now.
Okay.
Just a minute. Great. You can see those. I'm gonna back that up. So great. Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about the process as we go through these slides. This first slide is McKenna, and she is holding one of her lobsters, a pretty big lobster there. This, I took when I was out on the boat with her. And one of the things that I did do, I spent a lot of time in these 4 years really as much as they would allow me, and it was such a gift of trust and friendship they gave me, right, to just follow them around. And quickly, so I started off at their high school, their games, in their classrooms, hanging out in the lunchroom, and then it grew to going to their homes, their family homes, and then going to their workplaces, to their church services, to the basketball games, and on and on. Wherever they would let me go, I went. And at a certain point, McKenna said to me, I said, McKenna, do you think I can come on a lobster boat with you? And she said, yep, if you're willing to work. And I said, you got it. So I became her sternman. And we went out a few times. And this was one of those times when we were out on her boat. This is her family wharf, Holt Wharf. And you can see all the lobster traps stacked up there. The Holt family, her parents, really started with very, very little, and it was their dream to own a wharf someday and have it be a working wharf where they brought lobster boats in and they, as well as their own many others, and they built it, and they're really thriving as a result of it. And they all work together on that wharf. This is Audrey. We haven't really talked about Audrey other than we didn't even have a glimpse of her in the reading, but she is this great young woman who is just a little older than the other girls in the book, but is someone who is a great basketball player, led the team to the state championship, and comes from a fishing family also multi-generational. All the family, the 4 generations of family live on the Back Bay Road together in various houses. And I was able to go to her grandmother's house to spend time with the horses. Her grandmother's passed away, but she was this extraordinary woman, fierce in the best sense of the word, as many Downeast women are. And I got to spend a lot of time with Audrey, who made the difficult decision after earning a great coveted scholarship to Bates College, to return after her first year back down east, and enrolled at UMaine, because she really felt a mismatch. She missed home. She wanted to be a part of her community. She's a leader in her community. And she also wanted to be a speech pathologist, and Bates didn't give her what she needed. And so that is very much about staying and building, and not going off, making that choice. This is the team that won the state championship, and Audrey and McKenna are both there, along with Olivia Marshall, off on the side there. And this is Olivia's lobster fishing boat, which she named the Gold Digger in honor of the girls winning the Gold Ball State Championship. And Olivia, really a trailblazer as a lobster fisherman, allowed me to spend a tremendous amount of time on and off the boat. And I also got to be her sternman with her sister, Emily, and they are just a tremendous amount of fun, and also very serious about their fishing. They fish as well as, if not better than, the boys. And this is blueberry farms in this part of Downeast, Maine, in this part of Maine, are really something important to the economy, even though they've been in somewhat of a decline. In fact, one of the towns that the girls come from, Cherryfield, is known as the blueberry capital of the world. And so there's a lot of this farming. And one interesting piece is also got to spend time on these farms while raking was going on. And there is a big migrant and immigrant community that comes to farm, and that has become, I talk about this in the book, become an integral part of those coming from away who have made a choice to stay and raise their families down east. Staying isn't settling. This was a sign in the front hallway of the high school that shows the way in which the school really encourages its kids to find opportunities and helps them to find opportunities to stay and feel good about staying. Just the last 3 slides very quickly were taken by Willow, who is an extraordinary photographer, a great talent, who was mentored by the art teacher in the high school. And that art teacher really helped Willow find her voice and her lens through the camera. And that is just a few pictures to give you a sense of what I experienced.
Yeah, no, those are so helpful, Gigi. I think those are revelatory, and my God, Willow is so talented. Those
Yeah.
photos.
Yeah, she is. And she has definitely found her way and found her place, and she's thriving, and it's really something to see, despite the fact that there are still so many, sort of demons around her, right? Family wise, she has found the way to navigate them. And I think her story, as well as the other girls' stories, do give me hope, and I hope are something that other adolescents, and rural or not, find connection through. In many ways, I think that they have a lot to tell, right? And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to shine that lens.
Yeah, so very much. I feel like gratitude is in play, because not everybody gets in like you got in. And I mean, you speak girl. I'm thinking that you have your girl. How old is your daughter?
She's 9. She's
9.
9. And it's interesting because I've thought a lot about sort of what I've learned and what I've taken away from this experience. And one of the things that I've taken away is this notion that I just keep thinking, if my daughter is, half as resilient and self-aware and, sort of sure as these young women are, I will just be so happy. I think there's also this connection to nature that you talk about in Landslide, that you write about so beautifully, right? That is so much a part of stories of Maine that is so often just hard to capture. And one of the things that struck me about Landslide when I was reading it, and that really resonated for me, was the way in which you capture that. So you capture that, the grittiness of it, and the beauty of it, and the way in which it really is enthralling when you're a part of it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, those photos of the water at the end, I mean, they're so beautiful. And then you think of those hard days when it's cold and gray and they're still out on the water. Those women lobster people are still out on the water. Yeah, that was something I was really trying to do in Landslide, was make the weather both alluring and compelling and also menacing at times, right? And the weather is everything to both of the communities that we write about. The weather is everything.
It is.
I was really struck by the sign staying isn't settling. I was very struck by that. It's uncanny, actually, because there's an emphasis on this idea in my novel, Landslide, whether you stay or you go. Mm-hmm. And I really think it's a little bit specific to Maine. I wonder what you think. I know a lot of rural communities want their people to stay, but in Maine, it was always a question: were you staying or were you going?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that, and you would know from the experience of growing up there, how that feels, right? And how you go through the paces of that, because it does seem, I did see it in many of the young people that I spend time with, not just these young women, that there are these moments of sort of grappling with that. And I think there are these cross pressures, right? Because there is the family and the community. I think that it sometimes is at odds with itself over what it really wants for their kids. And so there are some mixed signals, but in the end, I think it comes down to this question of, not so much is there the economic opportunity, is there the job to allow you to stay, or will you have to go to find that other job? It's much more complicated than that. And what I saw were these layers of, can I find the right opportunity that would allow me to stay, that would allow me to continue to be a part of this, even though it is fraught in so many ways with so many challenges. Because I think that these young women, each of them, grappled with that, but knew in their heart that they were very, very strongly connected to the nature, to the families around them, even if it wasn't their own family, right? As in Willow's case, she was taken in, especially by her best friend Vivian, and her parents, who is the other young woman in the book. And so they grapple with this, but I think what I came to see was that even in the case of Josie, who may not return, that she will always have Downeast in her. That piece of it is really powerful. Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. Although, as you say, it is a constant theme. It is a constant theme around whether to stay or go.
And it's driven by so many factors, as you just said. It's there, you can try to get sort of, there is a wanderlust like quality to it, and then there's just a pure financial, necessity component to it. But I've never seen a sign like that. Staying isn't settling. That really encapsulates the whole idea of keeping Mainers in Maine, which I certainly know is a huge initiative here in Maine, to keep the brain trust here, keep the youth, keep the energy.
And one of the things that I thought was really another thing that I thought was really great in this was the way in which, so you had the school leadership, right, who put this sign up, and they put all these pictures underneath and capsules of those who decided to stay and what they're doing, right? And it's almost like a wall of honor. And then you have these teachers who are working side by side. You have a couple of teachers that I describe in the book and who play a big role in the girls' lives, who were not Mainers, right? Who came from other places and made a choice to stay and commit themselves to teaching these kids, mentoring these kids, opening the worldview of these kids. You've got this one art teacher who's extraordinary, Frannie, she goes by. Everyone calls her Frannie Francis. And she was born and raised in Long Island, goes to California and finds her way to Downeast, Maine, and, falls in love with it and falls in love with the kids, and is really taking them places without necessarily telling them that they need to leave, right? Mm-hmm. She's showing them the way forward. And I thought that was incredibly powerful too, as a piece of that.
That's so well said. And so it's so important to weave into this conversation. And in a way, you're one of those people, right? You come from away and you're completely compelled by the place. And then you start digging deeper. The pull of place, the pull of locale, right? The imprint on the DNA of these girls, and the imprint of place on all of us, I think, is done so well in the book. And we could talk for hours about it, right? The imprint of place, and place as sort of portal for all kinds of other themes around class and race and belonging. And I'm thinking maybe we should see if there are any questions here as we sort of turn the corner on our hour. I don't know if anyone has a question. They can put it in the chat, because I can see the chat, and then Gigi and I can sort of unpack the question. So don't be shy. We're happy to keep talking, but sometimes people have very specific questions, and sometimes we have a writer or two in the crowd that has a process question or something like that. So I'm just throwing that out there. I'll keep an eye on the chat as it comes through. So, hey, I grew up in a town not so unlike the towns that you're looking at in your book, Downeast. And I'm thinking, not everybody would be super excited to have a woman kind of arrive from outer space and come to the high school and say, like, hey, yeah, can I be your friend? Like, there were people I went to high school that would be like, who the heck are you? Right? So did you find your way slowly? Did it start to become, I mean, it sounds like you found the dream characters to follow, but were there some hit and miss? And yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Susan, and you're right. I definitely approached this with some trepidation, and I thought, as you said, I thought, well, why would they want to talk to me? And so I was fortunate in a couple of ways, in many ways. One way was that my introduction to the high school, which is really where I started, came through someone in this reverend who I knew, who runs a large nonprofit that serves the communities of Downeast, Maine, and many of the island communities. A nonprofit called the Maine Seacoast Mission that he really opened the door a little bit, right? He made a couple of calls and said, I'm sending this woman your way, and just talk to her, give her a chance. And so I really was welcomed by the school superintendent, who told me these wonderful stories, multi-generational guy, and told me these wonderful stories, and really embraced, I think, the idea of my going over to the high school, and the same with the high school principal, who's in the book as well. But I have to say, I sat down with these multiple groups of students. We just talked informally. I told them basically, I just want to hear what you have to say, and none of this is on the record. It's all just us talking. And I found that these young people, these kids, boys and girls, were incredibly not only open to talking about things with me, but just almost eager to share their stories. And I just listened. And as I found my way to these 5 young women, by talking to a number, and I did, there were a bunch of young people I reached out to, and some of them were just like, I don't think I can do this, and I respected that tremendously. When I found my way to these 5 young women, I basically just said to them, look, let's just talk. And I wasn't invasive, and I didn't want to prod, and I let it unfold, and I allowed them to just be comfortable with what they wanted to talk about. And I allowed them to have the space to just reveal things as they came. And I think out of that, there came a trust, and there came a sort of friendship over time. And some of the things that were revealed took many months to come out. I did not do this in a linear way at all. And I think that and I hope that they valued that. I know I valued the sort of wandering through their journey with them, and then finding in the end the pieces that put it back all together.
Yeah. Oh, what a journey you were on, and really what gold you found and were given. We have a question here. I'll just read it. It's a great one. What do you think sets lives like these in Maine apart from those in other rural parts of America? It's such a unique place.
Yeah, so it is in many ways unique, although I also think I might turn that question a little on its head and observe that as unique as aspects of Maine are, right? Geographically, right? It's right in the corner, and it's got all the sort of things we think of in terms of the natural pieces of it that are truly Maine. It is the most rural state in the nation. I think a lot of people don't know that. And so there are pieces of it that are unique. It's way up there by the Canadian border. There's this infusion of different cultures. At the same time, I think that there are more similarities than people might think. Changed. I was on Michigan Public Radio this morning, and we were talking a little bit about, right, rural America more broadly. And I, thought to myself, exchange cherries for blueberries, do river fishing for ocean fishing, and overlay some of the ways in which rural life are so similar. The challenges, we're dealing with opioid addiction, with loss of jobs, with factories or mills closing. All of these pieces you find in other parts of rural America are right there in rural Maine, in Downeast, Washington County, in other counties that are particularly rural in Maine. And so I think there are actually more bridges, more similarities than there are things that set them apart. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because I think we think of Maine and we think of, eating lobster rolls and, hanging out on the rocky beach and going to Acadia and hiking. And there are pieces of Maine that have so much in common with other small town places. And I wanted to connect that. And I also wanted to connect the sense of social capital, the sense of community, and the sense of strength and resilience that abounds in not only rural Maine, but rural Michigan and rural Oregon and rural South and up and down the Appalachian Trail. And I hope I succeeded in doing that.
Oh yeah, I think you did, and I just concur with everything you just said about these connections and these echoes and similarities. And I think when you move through the lobster roll, right, and you move through the postcard, this Maine is not far away. This Maine is not hard to find, but you just have to veer off the Route 1 to get off Route 1. And here's a question, Gigi. Probably we're getting close to closing out now, our time together. So I'll give you this question. Gigi sounds like she spent half her life in cities and half her life in the country. Can she talk about what she loved about Maine and rural America that kept her, and what it is that makes the state special? So it's kind of the flip side now.
Yeah, absolutely. Where to begin? So I think that one thing about Maine, about this rural place that has captured me completely, is as tough as the weather can be, and as gritty and if you read Susan's book, you'll see it and feel it in every sense, as gritty as it can be, especially in the other seasons, right? There is something about the closeness of to nature of Maine, of being in Maine. There is something about the connection to those rocky shores, to the beauty of it, to the way in which the sun, which rises so early, just casts this amazing glow over everything around you. That you feel very surrounded, I think, by nature. And I think in many ways, it is a way for one to discover oneself. And if you allow it. And I think that is one piece of Maine that I just cherish and I feel is so meaningful. And then I would say the people the people in Maine, and I know, people talk about Mainers and, it is not always the most emotive group, right? But so heart and soul, so solid, and so welcoming in a way that I think people don't quite know and realize. And I think that, as I found, if you go to Maine and you spend time there and you leave your airs behind and you just open yourself up, Mainers will open themselves up right back to you. And I just love that. And I appreciate it, and I'm grateful for it. And to bring it back around to my daughter, and to my husband, who's the one who introduced me to Maine and deserves all the credit for that. I hope that she grows up feeling that and knowing that and feeling that even though she is from away, that a piece of her will always be a part of Maine.
It's beautiful, and so hopeful. It reminds me, when I was living in China for several years, I met a journalist named Jim Fallows, and he and his wife Deb, when they left Beijing, they began this itinerant journey all around America, and you probably know about it, Gigi. And they ended up writing a book about all their encounters with small town Americans.
Yes.
They would just sort of move into this town, they would kind of absorb it the way a journalist might, the kind of very much the way you were working, I think, in Downeast in the book. And they reported in their book that the rural America they encountered was nothing like the rural America they kept hearing about on the nightly news, that there wasn't this antagonism and there was all this connection and community and hope. And they were like, what's this disconnect here? And I think this book is just another example of that, the edifying quality of small town America and of Maine. And like, it's a counter, a counter narrative to that really negative story, right?
Yeah. And the work of Jim and Deborah Fallows is really terrific. And I know that their book Our Towns was just recently made into an HBO documentary, which is well worth seeing. Yeah. And
it is.
Sorry.
It is. It's such a nice, it's actually a really lovely sort of, you're in such dialogue, I think, with that work of theirs.
Yeah, and I think that having more of that out there while still recognizing the significant challenges, right? I mean, you in Landslide, although it is fiction, right? It takes so much real world through the narrative, right? And you talk about it through these really richly drawn characters. You talk about those challenges. You talk about the dilemmas, right? They are all there. And they need to be recognized, and we need to work on them, right? There are things that can be done. There is always more that can be done and should be done for and with communities, and hopefully by communities to help themselves as well. But I think there is an important piece of the narrative that we need to keep pushing at, that we need to keep recognizing and celebrating, that there are communities, many communities, in which the young people in particular want to stay and build. They want to be a part of the future, and they believe in their hometowns, and they're willing to not only willing, but they are looking for ways to do that. And we ought to support that, and we ought to give them the space in our broader narrative that is so often lacking, unfortunately. We ought to give them the space to be proud of where they come from and where they're going in that choice.
Well, I think that's just so well said that I think we should end there. Yes, and yes. I just, the coda there is the way that all of this every scene in this book captures all of what you just said, but through the lens of these girls. So your book is empowering to girls, and that's so refreshing. and so also so needed at a time when we can see and hear about so much cultural misogyny. So that's really powerful too.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for that.
yeah, thank you so much. I feel like we've covered some great ground here, and thank you everyone for joining us. Gigi, I'll let you say goodbye. It's been my great pleasure.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a joy to talk to you. And it has been such a pleasure to be here with all of you. And also, please read Susan's book, Landslide. It is such a great book. And Chris, thank you so much for hosting this tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Gigi. Thank you, everyone who has questions. It's excellent. You can buy copies of both books from Powerhouse. We have links in the chat. And if you missed any of the event, we'll have it on YouTube soon.
Okay, take care all. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.